Welcome to the Ghosts of Plum Run Hour, only on Midwestern Marks. I'm Tim Russo, author of the Star Wars series for leftists, Ghosts of Plum Run. Thank you for joining us for the audiobook of Volume 2, Serpents and Dust. Today we read Chapter 4, Mag's Shotgun. First, a reminder that our episode for the week of May 23rd will feature history professor Timothy Orr of Old Dominion University, an expert on the Army of the Potomac and a former seasonal park ranger at the Gettysburg National Military Park. Tim will more fully introduce the Midwestern Marks audience to the 1st Minnesota's charge, which is why we're here. On to Mag's Shotgun. This chapter explores the effects on individuals of the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, one of the worst examples in American history of capital capturing the state. Mag Plum was the most notorious conductor on the Underground Railroad in the Gettysburg area. Only one picture of Mag is known to exist, the thumbnail picture for this episode of Mag herself demonstrating how slave catchers tried to kidnap her, tying her hands in front of her. Mag did in fact escape. Multiple news reports of the incident exist. In our break, I'll sort through some of what's fact and what's fiction in my portrayal of Mag's attempted kidnapping. I must thank Deb McCausland in Gettysburg, who helped with my research into Mag Plum and especially into Yellow Hill. I'd also like to thank Margaret Creighton of Bates College, whose 2006 book, The Colors of Change, Gettysburg's Forgotten History, features the most detailed information available about Mag Plum's life. Thank you both for your extraordinary help. Now, let's read Chapter 4, Mag's Shotgun, only in Ghosts of Plum Run, Volume 2, Serpents and Dust. Profit incentive from slavery in America, like a serpent choking the globe, created submarkets in human life at every transaction onward from the moment a seed of cotton was planted by a slave's fingers to the very top of world economics. From cotton dust choking the air at the docks in Liverpool, where bales of it were offloaded, to the finest linen tablecloth at tea in the Viceroy's parlor in India, to a haversack on a pioneer walking westward, profit from unpaid involuntary labor was duly taken at every sale. The victims left only with a lifetime of sorrow and pain passed along generations. Widow Tucker's Pawtucket textile strike of 1824 cost her so much, cotton's unpaid labor price followed her even to the grave, her memory haunting into distrust between a father and son emptying her home for the next tenant, who would work at the local cotton mill, the serpent suffocating its next prey. In Gettysburg, by February 1858, so many of these submarkets fed upon souls, the profit incentives collided with each other like atoms within the fire of the sun, the chain reaction exploding time and space into an eternity of suffering. It was here, in such fertile ground, the first ghost of Gettysburg settled into the cracks, to germinate, incubate, multiply, find a home, then swirl upward like a cyclone that towered over Mag Devitt's unborn child. Mag, by 22 years old, had spent more than a decade learning from Mama the slave-running trails of south-central Pennsylvania. Her mother was gone now, afforded a quiet, peaceful homegoing in her own bed by her merciful Savior in the shack on Abraham Bryant's farm, where she raised Mag to womanhood. She passed on the secrets of the trails to Mag in the way a mother passes along family recipes. With such care and love, Mag found her mother on the trail, the way love lives in a home-cooked meal. To Mag, running slaves after her mother died felt like praying to her mother above every step. She talked to her mother when things got tricky, in the dark, on stormy nights, alone, escorting a slave from one safe house or farm to another, in the dark streets and spooky country roads of Gettysburg, where slave catchers prowled like hyenas on the hunt. Tall, strong, and beautiful, Mag used her striking physical presence to her advantage any way she could, just as Mama taught her. Sometimes, Mama used to say, when you're running slaves, you just have to do certain things you don't talk about. Shameful things, which one day maybe just might pay off. Mag saw Mama's shame weigh upon her for doing that certain thing with Judge Ziegler before she was born. But he was a county judge, and certain things would be needed from a county judge if you spent your life running slaves to freedom. Mag never told John Fisher that her mama worked that certain thing many years ago with Judge Ziegler, such that one day Peter Fry ended up selling to Fisher his plot Fisher tenant farmed on, just so Mag could have a black-owned farm to walk slaves across on Cemetery Ridge. No, these certain things are deeply held quietly, so the shame from them is known by and weighs upon only one person. Mag did not know if Judge Ziegler was thus her father, her mixed-race yellow skin given to her by one of Mama's certain things. She just pocketed the information for potential use one day and took the lesson forward. Fisher noticed Mag was pregnant because his dog Flash did first. Flash had grown into a giant fluff ball since finding John Fisher as a puppy, then imprinting himself onto Fisher's life in a burst of stray puppy playfulness one spring evening, racing up Cemetery Ridge as a thunderstorm billowed on the horizon, bounding at Fisher on the crest, resting in his rocking chair after a long day of planting. By February 1858, Flash's closest friend after Fisher was Mag, her regular nighttime arrival scented by Flash, such that he'd wait at Fisher's door whenever Mag turned up with an escaped slave needing passage up from hiding at McAllister's mill. Slave running season being a warm weather operation, Flash's first winters at Fisher's made the dog miss Mag terribly. He would hear something outside in the snow, stand at the door to wait, but no Mag. Fisher would lay in bed watching his dog at the door, seated at attention, slowly laying himself down to sleep, to sadly accept there'd be no Mag that night. "Calm down," Fisher yelled at Flash that night in February that Flash caught Mag's scent. For real this time. Flash leapt at the door, up and down, knowing for sure Mag was coming. "What the hell is she doing out there this time of year?" Fisher wondered out loud, gathering himself, tossing another log onto his stove. In Mag burst from the cold, alone, no escaped slave in tow, brushing the snow off as Flash jumped on her, then oddly stopped jumping. As soon as she took her coat off, Fisher knew immediately. Flash sat at attention in front of Mag, wagging his tail. "Got some news, Fisher," Mag announced. "Looks like Flash figured it out," Fisher said, shocked. "How far are you along?" "Just starting the show," Mag said, demonstrating. "Folks can tell." Fisher sprang into action. "Get in here, sit down." As Fisher raced around his cabin to make things expectant mother comfortable, Flash attached himself to Mag like never before, lying his head on her lap as she explained what was what. "The less you know, the better," Mag said, cutting off Fisher's curiosity at the pass. She scratched at Flash's neck, who cuddled ever more to Mag's lap. "You know that, Fisher." "People gonna be talking," Fisher thought aloud. "They already talking. When this child comes, I'll be laying pretty low, so just have to get through summer," Mag declared. "Just wanted you to know." Fisher worried about Mag anyway, but now his worry exactly doubled. Mag's reputation for slave running had spread across Gettysburg and Adams County, especially among the free blacks she relied on most. Everyone knew everyone else. Small-town gossip was a fact of life. Hovering around the trail's allies were the weak ones, free blacks for whom the bounty on Mag's head from slave catchers proved impossible to resist. Anyone running slaves was at constant risk of being betrayed over to the vigilantes who made their money from the south of the border, who preyed upon the poverty of those at the bottom, sneaking in and out of Gettysburg on the hunt with bags of money. Trust was hard to come by. It evaporated so easily at the sound of a coin drop. Mag was a special prize, expert in the networks and honeycombs, a domino which upon falling would cripple the escape routes out of Maryland into Pennsylvania. Many a plantation owner south would pay quite a price for Mag Devitt. Now, carrying a child, if Mag were to be captured, the lucky slave catcher could sell 2 human beings on the slave auction block, not just one. Fisher knew someone, somewhere, would try to cash that in. His blood ran cold as he tried to figure out who that might be. It never occurred to Fisher that weak link would be Jacob Jones tomorrow morning. Jones was a stable hand for Joseph Tuckey, a white landowner in town with tenant farmers on a few plots. A family man, wife, 2 kids, Tuckey employed several free blacks, including Mag for his family's laundry and house cleaning, Jones for his horses. So Jones crossed paths with Mag at Tuckey's home in Gettysburg, when Jones ran errands to and from the stables. The price on Mag's head was well known to Jacob Jones, but so was the risk. Anyone tempted by the notion of selling her out feared Mag, just by how she walked, her commanding physical presence, her confidence in running slaves. All knew Mag had to be somehow connected enough that she might be protected, that the community itself might protect her, should someone try to betray her south to slavery. Thus, A strange equilibrium was struck between the risk of retaliation and the price on her head, keeping Mag safe from the market forces swirling around her world. When Jacob Jones realized he was the first to notice Mag's expectant condition that February, the price equilibrium was shattered and his greed overcame him. The market would soon arrive at a new valuation of Mag Devitt. Mag's stock would split when she gave birth. It was a bet too good to pass up. He hatched a plot. While Mag was doing Tucky's afternoon washing, Jones would call Tucky to the stables to delay him in paying Mag until cover of dark allowed whatever co-conspirators Jones could recruit to snatch her in the back alley behind Tucky's house, her usual route. It would only be a matter of a conversation. So Jones launched his venture to cash in on Mag with Child Incorporated on Tuesday morning, February 9th, 1858, with two slave catchers who kept their horses at the stable where Jones kept Tucky's horses. Philip Snyder and Ferdinand Buckingham came for their horses around sunrise. Jones approached. The dance commenced. Snyder and Ferdinand were venture capitalists of slave catcher outsourcing, local contractors to a variety of slave hunters down south. Old friends since school days, both misfits, but good horsemen, weak in the face of liquor, their lives were lived in the shadows as bounty hunters, always on the lookout for a catch that would yield return on investment. Outsiders, and paid to stay that way, they wandered the roads around Gettysburg on the lookout for a runaway lost, frequenting every tavern for rumors of hideouts or safe houses. Averaging one catch a month made the effort worthwhile, paid the bills, kept their women off their backs. Once the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 created the market for buyers and sellers, a legal framework to ply their trade legitimately, their ship came in. Business was booming by 1858. Snyder and Buckingham relied on desperate, impoverished free blacks like Jacob Jones, who maybe held a grudge, needed someone gone, didn't like their husband or wife, had just cheated on them, or just had some information to sell. Snyder and Buckingham paid cash for that. From there, the two highwaymen would negotiate a percentage of their catch upon delivery to a slave market or a sheriff or plantation owner in Maryland, sometimes Virginia. A tidy profit was in it for all. That Tuesday morning, Jones presented a sure thing. The word had been out for years that Mag Devitt would bring the highest price of any Negro in Adams County. So, that morning, a series of coded words about contraband and her whereabouts negotiated and sealed the trust amongst this board of this new business venture. The premium on Mag's pregnancy was, of course, Jones' top priority. "You boys getting two, not one," Jones kept saying. The deal done, Jones pocketed the first $50 that morning and the other $50 coming once the contraband was across the Mason-Dixon line and sold. A handshake later, the bounty hunters left Jones at the stable to come up with his cover story to keep Tucky occupied until dark. Things went downhill from there. Like any get-rich-quick scheme, first contact with reality unraveled it, beginning with Snyder and Buckingham waiting all day for dark to descend at a tavern. They couldn't believe their luck. "We can sleep the rest of the winter after this," Buckingham delighted, downing whiskey after whiskey with slams of his empty glass. "Easy there," Snyder insisted. He'd become used to his partner being drunk on the job. "Ain't nothing finished here yet, Ferdy." "I think we'll be famous, Phil," Ferdy declared. "Best bounty hunters in the East. We should go west." By dusk, Snyder could barely stumble to the getaway wagon, and Ferdy had fallen off of his stool, curled up in a ball in the corner of the tavern, snoring. No honor being among thieves, Snyder decided he could lasso Mag on his own, leaving Buckingham sleeping on the tavern floor. 100% of Mag Incorporated now for himself, Snyder swerved the wagon drunkenly to the alley behind Tucky's to wait. Cleaning inside Tucky's house, Mag could feel the clock tick. Being delayed for your pay was a sure sign something was up. But her worry was for her employer, not herself. She liked Mr. Tucky and his family. Regular work, regular pay, nice people too. She wondered, it's February, a bit cold outside. Maybe some tenant business had dragged on? Mr. Tucky won't stiff me, Mag thought, as she dusted the fireplace mantel, polished the glasses in the kitchen. Meanwhile, Jones kept Tucky occupied at the stable with tales of how he was worried about Tucky's horse or something. Tucky was immediately suspicious, so cut himself in on the deal with one pointed question, his head cocked, one eye squinting, curiosity of the hunt oozing from his glare. "What you up to, Jacob?" Tucky asked. Jones folded like a cheap tent in a stiff breeze, and within minutes, Tucky marched back to his house, finding Snyder waiting in the wagon in the back alley. Snyder saw Tucky coming and waved hello, hoping to seem less obvious. Tucky approached with the confidence of someone who'd cornered his market with inside information. "Mr. Snyder, I understand you've got a business proposition for me," Tucky announced, staring up at Snyder in the wagon with his hands in his pockets. Drunk, Snyder folded faster than Jones, stumbling out of the wagon to cut Tucky into the deal and cut Ferdy out, using Buckingham's 50% of the take to wriggle out of a tight spot. Alas, good old Ferdy had been rousted off the floor by the tavern keeper and hurled himself down the road, then into the alley to learn his 50% was now Tucky's. Hushed argument burst open in the alley. "You dirty snake," Ferdy said, swaying in the street. "Don't you get on me," Snyder shot back. "You fell over, like you always do." "Boys," Tucky advised, trying to calm things down, "let's not be rash." "Who told you she was pregnant?" Ferdy half yelled out at Tucky. "Now you just calm down," Tucky said, pointing at Ferdy. "Ferdy, I ought to whip you," Snyder announced, jumping off the wagon into the street. "That damn Jones spilled the beans, didn't he?" Ferdy shouted. Tucky had had enough. He knew he held all the cards, so he pulled out his revolver and cocked it. Ferdy and Snyder snapped to attention as Tucky pointed the gun at them. "Boys," Tucky said from behind his revolver, "let's discuss this like gentlemen, shall we?" Mag, inside the house, waited, cleaning the man's house who was about to sell her and the baby inside her to slavery. Jones had already begun celebrating, prancing into a roadside whiskey shanty, where the bottom rung of Gettysburg's free blacks gathered for winter comfort. His loose lips sinking his own ship, Jones bought drinks for everyone, including the quiet town drunk Alfred Plum, sitting in his usual spot at the shanty. Alf Plum barely existed. No one cared whether he did or not. His days were spent making bricks. His nights were spent at the shanty, a young man turning very old indeed, happy to let town gossip find him as it flowed, ebbed, came, and went. Completely ignored, just that fellow in the corner, Alfred Plum thus knew everything about everyone, but no one knew what Alf did. He just never talked. It surprised Alf that a low-rent stable boy like Jacob Jones suddenly had money to spend on rounds of drinks. So he listened and listened, as Jones, very clumsily, blabbed on and on. Then Alf quietly stood up, said a round of goodbyes, thanking Jones for the drinks, and began walking the slow, purposeful walk of a man on a mission, south down Tawnytown Road, out of town, in the cold of the darkening February evening. Tonight, Alfred Plum would not be quiet. Born a free black in Adams County into the day labor of his escaped slave parents, Alf's problem was that he was smart. So Alf figured out very early in life that the hopelessness of his future. The day labor, making or moving bricks, cutting wood, or digging ditches, stretching out until his death. After Alf's lonely, sad, resigned childhood, whiskey took it from there. Alf fell into a bottle as a teenager and never came out. By 22, he looked twice that, tolerating enough brick making to keep him out of debt, and slouched in a bar stool every night at most days. Not an angry drunk, nor a fun one, Alf withdrew, the corner in the whiskey shanty belonging to good old Alf Plum. Like his brain, which fired every synapse constantly like the universe on fire, his ears never turned off, so all those things people say over a drink they think no one hears, Alf heard. Being so smart, his mind cataloged it all, created fanciful tales and adventures of them within his mind, keeping track of the town's world. Alf knew who that shanty stable hand Jacob Jones was, who the phantom slave catchers Snyder and Buckingham were, and who Mag Devitt was. Alf knew every slave-running trail in south central Pennsylvania, knew who conducted which portion, knew the safe houses and their owners. Alf even knew about John Fisher, and nobody knew about John Fisher except Mag. Alf had heard someone say something about Fisher buying the plot he tenant farmed, put two and two together, so knew where to walk that night, to Fisher's. Alf always thought all that listening would come in handy one day. He figured God made him smart for some reason. Just need to figure out what God's reason was. His gait quickening, Alfred Plum spent the mile or so walk measuring his life. The whys, the wherefores, the maybes, and what ifs. The cold of February reminded Alf he hadn't walked this far this fast in many years. His body permanently bent into the crouch of a barstool drinker. It ached with every step. He cast his gaze around at the serenity of the countryside he'd been born in, finally seeing it. My goodness, he thought, what a beautiful place to live. Melancholy soaked Alfred Palm that evening, whiskey pumping through his veins, the cold winter air overcoming the dull pain of his existence to push him quicker along. He caught sight of John Fisher's cabin. Dusk nearly turned to dark. Then, trudging through snow to Fisher's door, looked up to heaven above to pray. Lord, 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 Alf whispered upward, shaking his head in disbelief that he'd walked so far, so fast from town. Flash barked at the door, and answering it to find the town drunkard, Fisher knew instinctively something was very wrong. Alf Palm, what the hell are you doing here, Alf? Jacob Jones cooking something up, John, Alf announced, unsure of his own voice, staring in horror at Fisher's eyes. Fisher had never really heard Alf talk. Tonight, Alf shouted. With help from his gun, Tucky had settled everything with his new business partners by leaving his whiskey flask with Snyder and Buckingham in the getaway wagon. Everybody gets a third, it was decided, a third of Mag Devitt and her unborn baby. So Tucky walked down the alley to the back door of his house, opened the door, and began to realize his profit. Miss Devitt, Tucky called out. Where you been, Mr. Tucky? Mag responded, putting down one of his porcelain figures she'd just polished. Mrs. Tucky upstairs, kids too. Very sorry I was delayed with your pay. I do beg your pardon, Tucky apologized, bowing, taking $1 out of his pocket, walking up to Mag. They smiled at each other. Thank you very much. I will see you next week, Mag said. Tucky nodded, seeing Mag to the door. Peering out to make sure she went toward the back alley instead of the front street. Tucky watched Mag begin her walk home, disappear on the turn into the alley. Then Tucky closed the door. Darling, Tucky called upstairs to his wife. His first step up the stairs, he began counting the money on its way to him. After tonight, he could buy 2 or 3 new plots to lease to tenant farmers, minimum. Might build a new barn for one of them. It's all perfectly legal, after all. The kids will miss Mag, of course, Tucky thought. They had grown attached to the funny cleaning lady who was tall, able to pick them up so they could touch the ceiling. But no, she wasn't one of the family, Tucky reasoned. A replacement would be found, and the kids would like her just as well. I'll be traveling tonight, Tucky shouted to his wife up in the bedroom. Oh, Joseph, not again, Mrs. Tucky shouted down. Just for tonight, my love, Tucky said. His breath skipped a beat, and Tucky looked around the narrow staircase as if lost. He listened toward the door. Silence. Things must have gone well in the alley, Tucky thought, remembering that he must get Mrs. Tucky that necklace that they could never afford at that fancy shop in Harrisburg. You'll see when I return. Tucky leapt up the remaining stairs, a spring in his step like just having won at poker. Have I told you how much I love you lately? Tucky asked, embracing his wife in the bedroom, his 2 children watching from across the hall. Why must you travel so much? And at this hour, Mrs. Tucky teased, poking his nose romantically. The children rolled their eyes at their parents getting all icky, retreating to their room to play. It's nothing, just a short day or 2, Tucky said, kissing his wife's cheek. If things go well, I might even be back by morning. So we're going to take a break here and discuss what about this is possibly fiction. The many reports, there's like 2 or 3 newspaper reports of Mag's attempted kidnapping. So Joseph Tucky did exist. So did Snyder and Birmingham and Jacob Jones. And you'll see the episode in this next bit where Jacob Jones gets what's coming to him was reported in the newspaper. And so for an author, for someone writing historical fiction, to put these things together and explain what exactly occurred, there was quite a bit of material there to work with. The problem being that Mag and Alf Palm did get married. Mag did have a baby. I don't know if she was pregnant during the attempted kidnapping. That I just completely made up, just to add a little more spice to the effect of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. The lesson being that the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was capital capturing the state, putting anyone in the country under capital's rules. So it created this market of people, literally people, a market of human beings, which operated under the shadows. So to someone like Mag Palm, who worked in the shadows, she was very vulnerable. Now, what we know of Mag is and Alf Palm's marriage and their child Josephine. We don't know who the father of Josephine was. One would assume it was Alf. For the purposes of my book, it's not, but we don't really know. We do know that this was a very troubled family. They were in court one against the other constantly for years after the war. Mag versus Josephine in court, Josephine versus Mag in court, Alf versus Mag, Mag versus Alf. It was not a good marriage. It was very turbulent. Instead of delving into all of that, there's plenty to work with. It gave me the plausibility to create a story around this attempted kidnapping that may have fit. So when you're writing historical fiction like this for a leftist and you want to add little things that may or may not have plausibly occurred, there was a lot of room. So what we're going to do is we're going to get back to this story where the kidnapping attempt occurs. Outside in the alley, things had not gone well. Snyder and Buckingham threw their wobbly selves at Mag on sight. Snyder grabbed Mag from behind, holding his hand over her mouth to silence her. Buckingham tried to tie Mag's hands in front of her, but Snyder couldn't keep her still, being drunk, thus swaying with Mag like a tree sapling in a breeze in front of Buckingham, trying to tie her up. Mag's first thought was disbelief. She had become overconfident. She was young, beautiful, tall, and strong. Running slaves so notoriously perhaps had gone to her head. So when she realized she'd been jumped in the alley, she first felt shame at being so stupid as to let this sort of thing happen. Her mother would be ashamed too, up in heaven. Mag knew it. Did she raise Mag to be so careless? I'm so sorry, Mama, Mag said to herself. So sorry. My God, what have I done? She collected herself enough to know Mama would expect her to fix this. You ain't going south to slavery, little Mag. No, no, no. Your mama ain't a raising no slave. Now you get yourself together and do what your mama taught you. So then Mag thought, what had she missed? I'm going to fix this, Mama. Just give me a second here, okay? Where did she let her guard down? Under prosecutorial self-questioning for half the blink of an eye, Mag concluded she would not make such a mistake ever again. So facts began to fill Mag's brain instead of regrets, or fear, or shame at disappointing her mother with her carelessness or anything else. Facts. Mr. Tucky was late with her pay. First fact. Second fact. The two slave catchers bumbling to tie her up stunk of whiskey. Then she thought of her unborn child. Then Mag thought of slavery. She knew nothing of it. All Mag knew about slavery was that people fled it in the middle of the night, where she found them with nothing but the rags on their whip-scarred backs, begging for help, which she gave. Mag never asked questions, and the slaves she helped navigate the trails never said much either. Runaway slaves didn't talk much about what slavery had done to them, instead speaking always of what freedom would do for them. She imagined her child born on a plantation and became so instantly sick to her stomach with the thought of it, her mouth groped for the first piece of Philip Snyder she could sink her teeth into. She found his thumb with her tongue. The moment Buckingham pulled the rope tight round her wrists in front of her, Mag's teeth went through Snyder's knuckle, snapping the joint. Then Mag tore at the remaining tendons with her jaws like it was a chicken wing, ripping Snyder's thumb off into her mouth. Blood gushed everywhere. Snyder released Mag in shock, spinning into the alley, holding the bleeding stump of his severed thumb in a whirling cascade of pain and shrieking. Buckingham, kneeling on the ground in front of Mag, finally had tied the knot around her wrists, pulled it tight, then looked up to see what the hell just happened, just as Mag spit the thumb out into his face. The blood spattering and blinding him, the thumb bouncing off his forehead onto the ground. Buckingham fell back stunned as Mag kicked him in the chest, frantically wiping blood from his eyes. Snyder had managed to climb into the wagon. Buckingham joined him instinctively, and they bolted like scared rabbits, snapping the reins at the horses to yank the wagon into the winter evening, gone. These drunk slave catchers were no match for Mag Devitt. There Mag stood, alone in the alley, the rope around her wrists tied tight. She felt the cold of February around her. The taste of Snyder's blood and flesh filled her mouth. Quiet enveloped her. It all hit Mag then, her breath panting, heaving from the brief struggle she just won. looking around the alley to make sure it was over. It was over. The danger past, Mag allowed herself to cry, standing in the alley behind her employer's house, hands bound in front of her, slumped over sobbing. Just gonna cry now, Mama, she thought. It was a cathartic cry, so alone there, so vulnerable, yet triumphant. I made it out, Mama. Ain't gonna be no slave. Her cries calmed, and Mag opened her eyes to see Snyder's thumb on the street. She kicked the thumb into the gutter. Then Mag shrugged her shoulder to her mouth to wipe away the blood, raising her bundled hands to use her sleeves. Time to get to work. So Mag just started walking south down Tawnytown Road to John Fisher's, arms crossed and bound across the child in her womb she'd saved from slavery with her own teeth. "You're here," Alf Plum gasped when Mag burst into Fisher's cabin. Flash leapt at her, licking her bruised wrists, no dog ever so happy to see anyone. "What the?" Mag said, confused. "Untie me, you fool." "Thank the Lord," Alf cried out, leaping up to look for a knife. "We thought you was sold south." "Where's Fisher?" Mag demanded, watching Alf scour the cabin for a knife. Flash instinctively pulled at the rope with his teeth, tugging Mag forward. "Easy, boy, easy," Mag implored, but Flash kept pulling. "What the hell are you doing here? Where's Fisher?" "Out looking for you," Alf said, finding a knife, rushing to Mag and freeing her with one swipe, tossing the rope to the floor as Flash jumped on it, thrashing it this way and that. Mag threw her hands to her face and began sobbing uncontrollably. Alf took her by the shoulders and walked her to the bed, setting down to hold Mag as she cried. Flash curled up with them gnawing on the rope. "Thank God Almighty," Alf rocked Mag back and forth in his arms as she wept, until she finally realized she was in the arms of the town drunkard, Alf Plum, and was back to her old self. "Don't you get no ideas," Mag warned, wiping her tears, popping off the bed. "I'm getting a kettle on for when Fisher gets back here." Fisher spent an hour not knowing where Mag was, racing around Gettysburg, knocking on doors, searching in alleyways, his shotgun over his shoulder. At Mrs. McGee's, Fisher got an earful. "Snyder and Buckingham?" Mrs. McGee asked Fisher. "How'd you know?" Fisher asked. Mrs. McGee laughed to herself. "You let me handle Jacob Jones," Mrs. McGee declared to Fisher. "That snake tried to kidnap my daughters just the same way." "I haven't found him yet," Fisher reported as he paced Mrs. McGee's tiny tenement on the outskirts of town. "She worked at Tucky's today?" Mrs. McGee asked. "He's long gone," Fisher said. "Wife knows nothing, thinks Mag just went home after work. He's probably got Mag across the Mason-Dixon line by now." Mrs. McGee shook her head as she got dressed to head out into the night and organize what Jacob Jones had coming to him. "I don't know, Fisher. Mag's a big, strong lady," Mrs. McGee said, wrapping her coat on. "You go on home. Girls," she shouted to her daughters in their room, "Mom's got some errands to run. I'm locking this door." Off Mrs. McGee went to ask around. Fisher marched back down Tawnytown Road to his cabin, where Flash greeted him at the door, gnawing on the rope that had been tied around Mag's wrists. "Where the hell you been?" Mag said to a shocked Fisher, purposely pretending nothing was amiss. Fisher nearly fell over at the sight of her. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Fisher whispered to himself. "You okay?" Alf smiled in the corner, having spent an hour calming and soothing Mag, now watching Mag come back to life. "Leaving me here with this fool?" Mag said, pointing at Alf, who shrugged at Fisher playfully. "You gonna make an honest woman out of Miss Devitt, Alf?" Fisher asked, relief filling his soul and coming out as humor. "Don't you give him no ideas," Mag shouted. "I've heard worse ideas," Alf said under his breath. "You bring any whiskey, John?" Fisher burst into laughter, got a flask from a cupboard, and tossed it to Alf. "No sign of Jones in town," Fisher announced. "Mrs. McGee thinks she'll find him." "Oh, she'll take care of him," Mag said. "You let me take care of the others." The next day, while Mrs. McGee formed a posse to find Jacob Jones, Mag went to Judge Ziegler to cash in every chip her mother had ever collected from him. "You know who Buckingham and Snyder are," Mag demanded, first thing in the morning at the courthouse in Judge Ziegler's law office. "And you know I worked at Tucky's. Just arrest them. Arrest them all." "Now, Miss Devitt," Judge Ziegler said from behind his desk, "you do know these men will say you were breaking the law by helping fugitive slaves. That is against the law, you know." "Ain't no proof," Mag spit back. "I make damn well sure of that." "What proof do you have these men tried to kidnap you?" Judge Ziegler asked. "Snyder's missing a thumb because I bit one off him." She pulled her blouse out from yesterday out of a bag. "See all that red? That's Snyder's." Judge Ziegler then realized Mag Devitt was quite serious about this matter indeed. He pondered a moment, so Mag turned on the charm. "My mama always knew you to be a kind gentleman, Judge Ziegler," Mag hinted politely. "She always told me I could count on you." They sized each other up. I can count on you, can't I? He issued a warrant for their arrest. The next night, Mrs. McGee's posse, all women and children, lined Breckenridge Street, hiding in the corners and doorways, waiting for Jacob Jones to turn a corner. You just stand watch, make sure we got time to give him what's coming, Mrs. McGee said to Fisher, standing next to her with his shotgun. What if he don't come round? Fisher asked. John, Mrs. McGee sighed, he thinks he's coming to sell another one of us south. This here all taken care of. He'll be coming. And so he did. In the black of night, they descended onto Jones like white blood cells, at least a dozen women and children beating Jones in the street with sticks, switches, whips, hooks, belts, as John Fisher watched from down the street with his shotgun over his shoulder. Mrs. McGee's daughters kicked at him like a rat in a corner, their mother shouting, I catch you trying to sell my girls south again next time, you dead boy. A police officer strolling the town square down the road heard the commotion and headed toward it, rushing up to Fisher. What's all this? The officer asked Fisher, who paused before answering, letting his stare linger into the officer's eyes. None of your business, Fisher answered, shotgun on his shoulder. The officer turned to watch the melee. On top of Jones, a woman kept her knee into his neck, shouting, screeching, howling. I will kill you, she said over and over, slapping his cheeks and then the other. Back and forth, Fisher and the officer were transfixed as a cyclone opened in their minds. The woman on Jones's neck in the center of it. Above the woman, lightning seemed to strike onto the street. The woman's hands grew larger. Each slap onto Jones rang out louder, like a bell tolling his funeral. Fisher's heart skipped a beat. She's going to kill him, he thought. Right here, right now. The officer next to Fisher couldn't move, frozen. Mrs. McGee's posse of women and children vanished, and all that was left before them was Jones under a woman's knee in a cloud, crying out for his mother. When suddenly the woman stood up, and the shared vision of Fisher and the officer ceased. Fisher decided enough was enough, so gave the officer permission to proceed. You'd better go on in now. The officer broke it up and helped a staggering, bleeding Jones to his feet, who immediately ran off. The ladies and their children melted away into the night, except the woman who almost killed Jones. She stood in the middle of the street, looking down. Breathing so heavy, Fisher thought she might faint. So he went to her. Jeannie? Fisher said. You all right? Toby's Auntie Jean had indeed found a home, which she would defend to her death, and at the price of anyone else's. She could not know that in 4 years Toby would begin his search for her. Finding his own freedom in a Minnesota regiment marching across the peninsula, she escaped. But she did know this fellow Jacob Jones would sell her back to that plantation as easily as he'd sell anyone else south who gathered that night to warn him not to try it ever again. Her escape was so miraculous through the gauntlet of the peninsula across hundreds of miles. Auntie Jean treated any whiff of slave catchers with eagle-eyed attention, lest her miracle be some sort of dream destined to become a nightmare. When Mrs. McGee rounded up her posse, Auntie Jean felt raw energy waiting, then boiling within her until it burst its pipe onto Jacob Jones. Hundreds of years of slavery, millions of slaves, seemed to reach through Auntie Jean's own hands right there in the street. Fisher could tell. He knew. Auntie Jean collected herself briefly, then fell into Fisher's embrace, sobbing. Go on home, Jeannie, Fisher said, consoling her as she turned to leave, ashamed at her rage, but proud of it at the same time, wiping tears and sweat from her still shuddering face. The officer approached Fisher. You know what this was all about? All what's about, Fisher said, then walked home. Over the next few months, karma chased Jacob Jones from county to county for his hand in trying to hand over to slavery Mag and Mrs. McGee's 2 daughters. Mag kept on Judge Ziegler just enough to get charges filed against Tucky, Snyder, and Buckingham, who all managed to somehow avoid any real consequence. But the word had gone out to the whole of Adams County never to mess with Mag Devitt, who soon became Mrs. Alfred Plum. As Mag's child grew within her, she decided that baby needed a father, so she could use a new last name, and Alf Plum seemed as good a fellow as any, despite being the town drunkard. Mag's life on the margins, in the shadows, at the mercy of bounty hunters, would benefit from Alf Palm's ears constantly hearing things in the taverns, and Alf Palm would benefit from some place to be other than a saloon. Before the baby was born, they were wed on the crest of Cemetery Ridge at the back of Fisher's farm, Flash wearing the rope that had bound Mag's hands as a collar now. Fisher's wedding present to Mag was his old shotgun. She gave birth to a girl she named Josephine. Mag took a good while off from running slaves to nurse Josephine, and to make sure Alf could handle a little baby girl. Surprising no one, he couldn't, so Auntie Jean babysat Josephine instead. When she returned to running slaves in the spring of 1859, Mag carried that shotgun everywhere she went. The next Mag heard of Jacob Jones was 5 years later, the night of June 26th, 1863, less than a week before Harrow's brigade of Hancock's Second Corps arrived at John Fisher's farm the morning of July 2nd, 1863. Mag burst into Fisher's cabin on the Tawnytown Road, shotgun on her shoulder, completely exhausted. "Josephine up on Yellow Hill," Mag told Fisher. Took her and Alf up there. Fisher sat on the edge of his bed in the tiny cabin, staring at the floor, his big dog Flash lying next to him, cuddling to comfort Fisher. "McAllister's mill full up," Fisher said blankly, petting Flash. Mag fell into a chair. "Rebs running through town taking whatever they want," Mag said with a plop. "Might be time you stayed here," said Fisher. Mag had spent the previous week escorting everyone in Gettysburg who might look yellow or brown or black along the slave trails to safety. Now that she was alone at her shack on the Emmitsburg Road, Fisher got off the bed to prepare the loft in his one-room cabin for Mag as a guest. "Think everybody out okay," said Mag. "Not everybody," Fisher said. "Who?" "Jacob Jones," Fisher said. Mag chuckled. Well. Mag thought, then stopped herself. She just couldn't laugh. Mag had spent a week shepherding refugees out of town ahead of Lee's army because she knew all the routes. Only old men like Fisher stayed in town, knowing they were useless to slave auctions. Mag stayed, risking capture to be sold south, yet again, because she was needed. The rest headed north toward Harrisburg or east to Philadelphia, never to return. Or some, like Mag's family, went 8 miles north to Yellow Hill, so isolated and unknown they could wait it all out. Mag's shotgun comforted and calmed the dozens of late deciders she escorted to safe houses and safe routes during the last weeks of June, 1863. So heavy landed the silence in Fisher's cabin. They knew Jacob Jones was dead or would soon be. "Who told you?" Mag demanded. "Folk at the mill," Fisher said. "He tried to cut a deal, so they say." Mag shook her head. She knew what that looked like. "He thought because he played their game he was one of them. So Jacob Jones surely laid it on thick with the hard sell when a Texas corporal put the rope around his wrists. Jones tried to cut deal after deal, more new slaves in exchange for letting him loose. He promised, hourly. After marching a few miles tethered to a dozen other new slaves, they camped. His predicament finally occurred to Jacob Jones that first night, unable to sleep, tied to 4 other people under a tree. Realizing at last the horror he so casually tossed people into so many times of his life, whom he now counted, one by one, each step of the forced march as a brigade of Confederates dragged them along with their invasion, like mules. "How far you think he got?" Mag wondered. "Not far," Fisher said, certain of it. Indeed, at the first opportunity, Jacob Jones made a run for it, having gnawed through the rope a bit more each night, while the 3-day Battle of Gettysburg distracted his captors. For 3 days, a dozen new slaves tied to him in a field behind the Confederate lines. Jones took a little nibble at the rope every chance he could, tearing at it, scraping with the front of his teeth, bit by bit. His gums bled, so he had to hide his face whenever one of the Confederate privates saw fit to check on his regiment's contraband. Slowly, the rope began to fray. During the final cannonade on July 3rd, preceding Pickett's charge, the noise was so loud it let Jones gnaw at the rope unheard, so he made very good progress that day. His gums bled more, so he ate dirt to cover it up. On Lee's retreat after the battle, somewhere before crossing into Maryland, Jones finally snapped the rope and took off. The regiment found him under a log near a creek where he flailed the final desperate fight of his life. They did not kill him right away. Instead, they tied him between 2 trees, beating him for sport, then burned him alive, forcing the rest of the captured new slaves to walk by what was left of Jacob Jones on their way to be sold. "Bet he gave him hell," Mag said. Fisher sighed, like the devil he was. And that is Chapter 4, Mag's Shotgun, of Ghosts of Plum Run, Volume 2, Serpents and Dust, by me, Tim Russo. Little quick analysis of that last scene. The only mention of Jacob Jones is in newspaper articles where he did get the shit kicked out of him by a bunch of African Americans who lived in Gettysburg, mostly women and children. No one knows whatever happened to Jacob Jones, but there is a report from one Union regiment following Lee after the Gettysburg of finding an African American tied to trees burned, basically lynched by Lee's army as it was heading south from Gettysburg after defeat. And I put those two things together. That's the license you sort of have as a fiction writer, just to drive something home about the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and what may come of it. So, thanks for joining us on the Ghosts of Plum Run Hour, only on Midwestern Marks. And next episode, we will talk about the Segafoose Hotel, which is in Uniontown. We're going back to Uniontown with the regiment on June 30th, 1863. I'm Tim Russo, author of the Star Wars series for leftists, Ghosts of Plum Run. And this is the Ghosts of Plum Run Hour, only on Midwestern Marks. Thanks for joining us.